Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Matt Trotzik. I'm a senior consultant here at IBIS. Today we're going to be talking about the PO generator. While I'm doing the discussion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody. Please write down your questions so that we can answer them at the end of the call. Okay, to kick things off, we're here to talk about the PO generator. What I want to do is walk through the agenda, what we're hoping to accomplish during this period. The first one being the overview. What is the PO generator? What can it do for me? And what does it look at? We're going to walk through the setup, how to actually go in and set up items in order to be included in the generation of purchase orders. We're going to walk through the running of the PO generator. We're going to look at the review of suggested purchase orders. Then we're going to go ahead and create purchase orders. In purchasing, we're going to review those created purchase orders. At the end, we're going to walk through everything we just covered, and then we're going to address questions. So, without further ado, one thing I promised when I was sitting here walking through, somebody walked in and said, the PO generator sounds like an Arnold Schwarzenegger thing. I thought I'd forgo everybody and not use my Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. The overview of the PO generator. The PO generator is a functionality to go in and suggest purchasing requirements to meet based on a static demand and inventory stocking levels. What I mean by a static demand, this is looking at current inventory levels and open sales orders, an available quantity. The purpose of this class is to highlight the purchase order generator and does not take into account MRP and forecasting. I wanted to highlight that because that is a whole other piece that we could get into, but we're only going to focus on the PO generator. So it is going to look at a static demand. What do I have in my inventory? What do I need based on sales orders and my inventory levels? And what do I need in order to meet that demand? So the first piece we're going to walk into is the actual setup of these particular items. The PO generator is set up through the item resource planning in the inventory module. There's a couple different ways that we can get to this. I always go old school, and so I go across the toolbar, and we're going to go to cards, inventory, item resource planning. So what we're going to do is we're going to bounce back and forth between the presentation and Great Plains so that we can actually see what it is we're talking about. So jumping into GP, like I talked about, I'd like to go old school. It is contained in the cards in the inventory module, so we can go to cards, inventory, item resource planning. There are a couple different ways that we can get to this, but this is probably the most direct route. An alternate way is if we are setting up a brand new item and we want this new item to be included in our planning, I can set up my new item and I can utilize my go-tos. Normally when I'm setting up items, it's always my recommendation to go look at the go-tos and just work my way down. Identify the currency, price list, quantities. The very last one is my item resource planning. Coming into item resource planning, the first thing we have to do is obviously identify our item number that we want to use in our planning to set this particular item up to be included when we run the purchase order generator. Once we've identified the item number, what we have to do is identify which site or default value we want to set for this planning piece. What I mean by that, I have, for example, my raw materials warehouse, and I want to maintain a very specific stock level for this particular item at this particular site. So I can come in and identify a specific site, and I can set different levels for all the different sites that I have. So if I want to maintain a certain stock level at one site versus another, I can set as many sites and as many planning pieces per site. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to set our main warehouse stock levels. The next two pieces, these actually roll into the purchase orders when we go to create them, if we identify buyers and if we identify planners. These are not required in the purchase order piece or in the planning piece, but it is an additional functionality within the planning to identify the buyers or the planners if the company so chooses. The key, for lack of a better term, to turn the item on for using PO Generator is under the order policy. We can do the drop down and select Use PO Generator. Once we've identified this particular site to use the PO Generator, we have to set some quantities. The first one is the order point quantity. The order point quantity is a quantity that it will order increments of. And so what I mean by that is if I have my order point quantity at 10, it will order in increments of 10 to meet my demand. I'm going to go ahead and set my order point quantity at 25. The next one is the order up to level. The order up to level is maybe I want to maintain a very specific quantity at this site. I don't want to order in quantities of 25. Maybe I want to always have in stock 500 of these. So I have two different points. What this will come into play when we actually set this particular item up for generation. So by setting my order point quantity, it will either order in increments of 25, or based on how I set it up, it will order up to 500. Now, what it does is it is actually going to look at my available quantity when I'm generating purchase orders. So what is available quantity? Available quantity is actually what we have on hand, so the quantity on hand, plus the quantity on order, how many we have open purchase orders for, minus anything that is currently allocated, we have open orders for and the inventory is allocated, plus the quantity requisitioned, plus the quantity back ordered. So it's taking what we currently have and what we're planning on getting and subtracting it from, or we're subtracting the allocation, the requisition, and back order from what we currently have. So that's what's giving us our true available quantity. Once we set these order up to level, so we've gone through, we've selected the particular item, we've identified if the planning is done as a default or a specific site. We're setting a specific site because we want our warehouse to have a very specific quantity on hand. We've set the order policy to use the PO generator, and we've identified the order point quantity as well as the order up to level. Next on our setup is, so we've set this particular item to be generated via the PO generator, but now we have to set some parameters or some criteria for actual ordering. So in order to get to the PO generation item screen, it is at the bottom of our item resource planning window. In the bottom right, there's a little button, PO generated item. Very straightforward. On this particular screen, this is how we identify how we want this particular item ordered. On the screen before, we just said order. Now we want to tell it how we want it to order. So because we selected site, this is going to be set for this particular site that we selected. Again, if we set multiple sites, each time based on what site we're planning, it will show up in our PO generated item maintenance. We have to set our order method. Do we want it to go to this specific site, or do we want to set a master site ID for this particular item? Well, in this case, we just want it to go directly to our warehouse. And this will come into play as we know from creating purchase orders what site is going to be receiving this particular item. Remember the order point quantity and the order up to level that we set before? This is where it comes into play. We have 3 different options that we can choose from the replenishment method. We can order based on our order point quantity, so it will order in increments of 25, or it will order up to my level. In this case, it will make sure that I always have 500 in my warehouse, or it will order based on the vendor economic order quantity. And of course, we know from the economic order quantity, it's the cost of ordering versus the cost of storing. And so we can actually come into our inventory, and we'll digress for one quick second, and we'll look at this particular item as well as the vendor that is assigned. And here's our economic order. What this will do is, based on the ordering that we set, be it order by quantity or order up to level, it will also, if we set it to order based on economic order, it will take this into account if we set order to vendor EOQ. So what it'll do is it'll look at how much we're ordering, and it's going to say, okay, we're ordering maybe 50, but it's in my best interest as a company to order 100. Maybe I'm going to get a deal if I order 100 at a time, or maybe the cost of shipping is better for me from an economic standpoint to store these items than it is to order increments of 25. So that is an option when we set up our generator item maintenance. But we're going to go ahead and order to our order point quantity. So what it's going to do is it's going to look at our order point quantity. It's going to take a look at the available quantity, which is again quantity on hand minus the quantity allocated, and order the remainder. Next is our vendor selection. What do we want to do? Do we want to grab whatever the site primary vendor is? Do we want to grab the vendor with the lowest cost? Or do we want to grab the vendor with the shortest lead time? This comes back to whatever is most economical from my standpoint at my business. Well, I want the lowest cost. Next is our cost selection. Again, we have a couple different options. We have whatever the last originating invoice cost for this particular vendor was. We can order based on the item current cost or the item standard cost, as well as a specified cost. We can identify what we want the cost to be when that PO is generated. So there's a couple different options when it comes down to it. A lot of times I will see with this particular vendor, there's a very specific cost that I want to order this item at. So in this case, I can set my specified cost and identify what I want that cost to be. Or I just want whatever the last invoiced cost for this particular vendor was. Once we've identified these different criteria, we have the option to include a few additional pieces. Do we want to include allocations? Do we want to include back orders? Do we want to include requisitions? Or we can exclude those. Maybe we don't want to see our back orders in our planning. We don't want to see requisitions in our planning. But I want to include everything because I want a true visibility as to what I need to order. Once we walk through this particular item maintenance, we can select OK. And again, it is specific to this site. And we're going to go ahead and save it. So now anytime we want to come back and see what it is for a site, we can bring back up that site. Maybe I need to make an adjustment. And I can see what my order criteria are for this particular item at this particular site. The benefit of these is I can come in and adjust my item resource planning for this particular item anytime I want to, any site, or set my default values. So I can make any adjustments I want to at any given time. And so me as a inventory manager or a purchasing director, I can come in and make any adjustments for my static inventory. Okay, so we went in to the item resource planning. We set the order method. We want it to come to a site. We set the replenishment level. We want to order to our order point quantity. So it's going to order in increments of 25. We've set the vendor selection. We want the one with the lowest cost. We've set the cost selection. Well, we want what we got invoiced for last time because that was correct. And then we identified the features we want to include. Once we've set these criteria, now we're able to go in and start generating POs. In order to generate POs, of course, this is a purchasing functionality. We do the setup in the inventory. So the inventory manager goes in and sets all the quantities in working with the purchasing group. But now it's my time as the purchasing director to come in and let's get these puppies ordered. I'm going to come into my purchase order generator. I can go based on my windows, or I love going old school. I can come to transactions, purchasing, purchase order generator. Now the purchase order generator has 5 different options by which we can order items, or we can generate purchase orders. We can do it based on item numbers. Maybe we want very specific items. Maybe we want to order for very specific sites. Maybe the only site I want purchase orders generated from is my raw materials warehouse. Or if maybe I'm a buyer, or I want to order specific for a buyer, specific for a vendor, or maybe a class ID. Maybe we've set up a unique class for PO generated items. In our case, we're going to go ahead and bring everything in. We just walk through one particular item, but we want to see what else is out there that will get generated. So I'm going to leave all these as default as all. So it's going to pull in all items, all sites, all buyers, vendors, everything, and show me what items should be ordered based on a suggestion from the application. A couple of options that we're going to do, or we have the option of selecting. We can include demand from other sites, or we're going to include orders with no vendor ID. So we want to bring all the information in. Now, at the bottom we see values for suggested purchase orders. What this is this is what's going to be brought over when we create a purchase order. Do I want all purchase orders to be under a very specific buyer? Do I want the buyer to be based on from that particular item? Or do I just not care? Again, buyer's not a required field unless we use it at the particular company to track you're spending too much. Great tool. The next piece is, what do I want the purchase order date to be? Do I want it to be today? Do I want it to be yesterday? Do I want it to be 3 weeks from now? It will, by default, grab the system date. So whatever we're logged into the system as, it will grab that date and it will key it in. Now, is this set in stone? Absolutely not. Once we get into looking at the suggested purchase orders, I'll show us how we can go in and change pieces, change order criteria on the purchase order before it's created. Next, we want to set the promise date. Is the promise date today? Is the promise date whatever the date is plus the vendor lead time? Again, the vendor lead time, when we go back to the item vendor where we can key in the vendor lead time for this particular item. So it's going to come in and maybe the lead time is 14 days. So it's going to look at whatever the purchase order date is and add, in this case, 14 days. Or maybe I want the promise date to be something specific. But I want my promise date to be my purchase order date. Now, we can set the promised ship date. So what is the ship date? What is the promise date minus the ship date? So the promise date is today, and then maybe how many days it's going to take to get it. So I'm going to say minus 3 days. So I know that it's going to be promised to be shipped 3 days before my promise date. So I know that I'm going to receive it on time. This is completely optional if we care to use it. Once we set the PO generator criteria, of course, once we just set everything up, that's a one-time deal. Maybe we have new items that we need to, each time we create, we have to set them for PO generation, or maybe these are just one-offs that we want to set up, whatever the case is. Once we have set our criteria, now it's time to review the system suggested purchase orders. So we've set the criteria. Now we can suggest purchase orders. When selecting the button, what it does is it brings up any item that is suggested or that is set as a PO generation item and in need of purchasing based on the demand. So here we see our item we just set, well, but it's got a red X. So what does that mean? What this is this is a heads up to the purchaser saying this is missing something. So I can come in and see what is this particular item missing. In this case, well, we're missing a vendor. How do I know where to order this from? I kind of need a vendor to know that. So I can come in and I can select a vendor. And as soon as I select my vendor, that little red X disappears. Now, we set the order point to 25. Why is there only 5 being ordered? The reason 5 is only being ordered is because what the system did is it went out and looked at the available quantity. And it's going to order the difference between the available quantity and the order point quantity. So maybe we have 20 on hand or 20 being ordered or whatever the case is. And so it saw that we already have 20 inbound and we only need 5. To show the difference between order point quantity and order up to level, we're going to go ahead and cancel out of this. And we're going to make an adjustment to that item we just set up. Maybe we don't want to order point quantity, but maybe we want to order up to a specific level. We're going to come in, we're going to identify the site. And we're going to come into our PO generator item maintenance. And here's our replenishment method. Instead of the order point quantity, we want to order up to level. So what it's going to do is it will take what my available quantity is and the difference between my available quantity and my order up to level and order whatever that remainder is. So we made an adjustment. We keep all our default like before. When we suggest it, there is our item number, and now we're ordering 480. Just like before we saw, there is an available quantity of 20 somewhere in my system. So it's taking that difference and ordering 480. Looking at this particular item, we see a number of things. Of course, we see the item, We see the vendor. As we see selecting through, there are certain items that become highlighted, other ones do not. Anything that is highlighted allows me to go in and change it. So again, this is a suggestion. I'm looking at my static demand of inventory. I'm looking at what I have set my replenishment method to. And it is suggesting that I order 480 based on my demand. With my 20 on hand, I'm going to need 480 of these. Maybe I want to order from a different vendor. I can come in and change my vendor. Maybe instead of 480, maybe I want to order cases. I can change my unit of measure. Maybe instead of 480, I really just want to order 450. So I can change that suggested value. I know what my demand is. I know what my schedule is. Maybe I have a spreadsheet or something else that shows me my normal forecasting without using MRP. I know that instead of 500, I'm really going to only need maybe 450 or 430. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and keep what the system suggests. The next piece is the unit cost. Maybe I just received an email and this particular vendor said, you know what, since you're going to order this many, we're going to cut you a break. We'll give them to you for an even 100. So I can come in and adjust my unit cost. The next is, where do I want this shipped to? Do I want it to come to my primary site? So of course I can do my normal lookup. Do I want it to come to this location or maybe a different warehouse? So I can make that distinction where I want this particular item to be shipped to. Once I have gone through and cleaned up anything that is missing, now I can come in and say which purchase orders do I want to create. I can do this by just coming in and selecting under the include column and say, you know what, I just want to include that one item that we were working with. So this will be the only item that is generated in a purchase order. Maybe I want to include all of them, mark them all. Maybe I have 1,000 items out here and I want to see just the items that are marked, or maybe the ones that are unmarked, to make that decision. So it's a great way to come in and, based on the quantity of items that you have, based on the suggested items, to see what am I ordering. So me as a purchasing person, I can make that distinction. Come in and actually look at all the different items. So we've gone through and we have identified the purchase orders that we want to create. Okay, so we've reviewed the suggested purchase orders. We've looked at them. We've corrected any red X's that let us know that something's missing. We've walked through and updated any fields that we want to. Maybe we've changed cost, maybe we've changed unit of measure. Once we've gone through all this stuff, now it's time to create those purchase orders. So we have one item where the purchase orders will be created. So we come in and we're going to select Generate Purchase Orders. As soon as we do that, it's going to give me a little report. I want to print this to screen because I want to see what I'm ordering. So I can see, here's my purchase order number that was created. So now I have a reference so I can go in and review this purchase order. I see my vendor, I see my ship to address, I see the item, I see how many I'm ordering. So I see all the details that have now translated into a generated purchase order. So generating purchase orders is simple as suggesting them, selecting, and generate a purchase order. Again, that report will just show you all the details that are involved in this new purchase order. Now, we can come in and pull that purchase order up, and just like before, we can make any last-minute adjustments. So, in our GP, we're going to come into our purchase order entry screen. This is, as we know, where purchase orders are generated. And that PO that was created is PO 2075. And here is our new purchase order. So it is now a policy of me. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to verify everything because I want to make sure before I print this one last time. I've gone through and I've looked at it, I reviewed it before I created it, but maybe I just want to do it again just for giggles. I'm going to look at the vendor. I'm going to look at the dates. Where's my promise date? Again, we set it to whatever the purchase order date was, and the promise ship date, we set it to whatever the system date was as well. We see the item, the unit of measure, just like before, the order quantity and the unit cost. And so now we have a generated purchase order. To walk through a review, the first thing we did is we walked in and we looked at the setup of the particular items. We went into item resource planning, set that particular item to use the PO generator. We've set the quantities, we've set the order point quantity, and we've ordered the order up to quantity. We've gone in and we've set our criteria in the PO generated item maintenance screen. We set it to order my replenishment method, order up to, or my order quantity in increments of. We've gone through the running of the PO generator. First off, setting the filters. Maybe we want to do one specific item. Maybe we want to do a specific site. Maybe we want to do a specific vendor. We've included the options. Do we want to include back orders? We have made any changes or the values for the PO. We've set the date, we've set the buyer, we've set the promise date, we've set the promised ship date. We've reviewed the suggested POs. We've identified the purchase orders that need attention. Maybe we need to add in a vendor. Maybe we need to add in a unit of measure. We've cleared out all those little red X's. We've also made any changes to the information prior to the purchase order being generated. We've adjusted cost. We've adjusted our ship to location. We've gone through and adjusted everything, and now we've generated purchase orders. So we look at our PO generated report, and it now outlines all the different POs that were created in the purchasing module. Next, we'll go in and actually review the created purchase orders. We'll pull up the purchase orders in purchasing. Just review it one last time for good measure, and we'll print it off. So this concludes a walkthrough of the purchase order generator, the setup, the generator, the review. Okay, please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have further questions in regards to the PO generator or any Great Plains functionality. Thank you very much for attending, and I look forward to talking with you next time.